Who was the most miserable person you dealt with? I worked as a maintenance supervisor for a mid-sized apartment complex about 20 minutes outside the city. It wasn't fancy or anything, just a lot of busted heaters, leaky sinks, and people forgetting their keys after one too many drinks. I liked it though. There was something solid about knowing people could count on me. Most of the tenants were cool, a few were high maintenance, but nothing I couldn't handle except for this one guy. People called him Bathroom Bill behind his back. He lived in 2E and was the kind of guy you could hear yelling through the vents if someone dared flush upstairs past midnight. The guy was notorious. He'd call the office twice a week about his water pressure, leave sticky notes on the elevator that just said, "Fix it," with no explanation, and once threatened to sue a neighbor for whistling aggressively. The first time I had to deal with him, it was because his toilet wouldn't stop running. It was a simple fix. I figured I'd be in and out in 5 minutes. The property manager just looked at me and said, "Good luck." When I knocked, he opened the door and looked me over like I was a door-to-door scam artist. Said nothing, just stepped aside and pointed to the bathroom. The place was spotless, but in a weird way, like someone had cleaned it obsessively, but hadn't opened a window in 10 years. The blinds were shut, the air stale, and it smelled like bleach and old paper. While I was fixing the toilet, I noticed his medicine cabinet was filled with neatly labeled bottles and a little notebook filled with timestamps. Like he'd been tracking every symptom he'd had for years. When I finished up, I turned to let him know, but he was already standing in the hallway, holding an old photo frame. It showed him in a uniform, younger, standing next to a woman in scrubs and a kid with braces. He caught me looking and said she was a nurse. He wanted to be a pilot. I nodded, didn't want to pry, but then he said, "Car wreck, 10 years ago." He didn't look at me when he said it, just kept staring at the photo. I used to run maintenance crews for the city, buildings, schools, hospitals. After the accident, I moved here. Figured I'd just fade out. I didn't know what to say. I just told him the toilet was good now and handed him a fresh flapper valve in case it ever happened again. He didn't say thanks, just nodded once and closed the door. 2 weeks later, I found a folded envelope in my office mailbox. Inside was a list of 3 maintenance items, each one written with exact details and timestamps. At the bottom it said, "Thank you, that toilet hasn't made a sound since." After that, every time I had to stop by his place, he'd have a new list ready. Sometimes they weren't even problems, just suggestions. Might want to check the caulk in the laundry room sink, mold potential. And he started asking questions. Nothing big, just stuff like, "You ever worked on high-rises?" or "You keep your own tools?" I told him about some of the jobs I'd done before. He actually smiled once when I mentioned a plumbing disaster at a nursing home, said that's where the real work is. One day, I brought him a spare wrench set I had lying around. Figured he might appreciate it. He didn't say anything at the time, but a week later, he left a little wrapped package outside the office. It was an old city maintenance badge, polished and framed, with a note that just said, "For someone who still gives a damn." He never stopped being a pain to everyone else, still left notes, still called 3 times a week. But to me, he was different. Not because he changed, but because I finally understood him. He wasn't miserable for no reason. He was broken, and holding on to whatever little routines he had left.